The bride wasn't who she said she was. The old priest knew at the moment he saw the look in her eyes. One whisper. One stranger. One phone call in the night. And a wedding day that turned into a manhunt. But what came after was even more shocking. This isn't just a story about love or betrayal. It's about how truth rises from the ashes of lies. And how the heart can still heal, even when the world falls apart. Keep watching. Because the last person you'll expect is the one who breaks your heart. They say a bride's eyes shine brightest on her wedding day. But Reverend Thomas Haley, he saw something different. Not light. Not love. Fear. And not the kind of fear that fades. No, this was the kind that follows you. The kind that settles into your bones like winter and never quite leaves. He'd been the pastor at Mayberry Falls for 43 years. He'd seen over 200 weddings, held more hands than he could count, and buried more good men than he cared to remember. But that day, the day Emily Walker stood trembling at the altar, something was wrong. The church smelled of old hymnals, beeswax polish, and magnolias left in the heat too long. Outside, the wind hummed softly through the oak trees, swaying like old women rocking on front porches. Inside, children fidgeted in shoes too small, their mothers whispering, "Sit still now," through tight smiles. Reverend Haley adjusted his glasses and turned toward the couple. Daniel Brooks, the groom, stood tall, sweating through his collar. Nervous as all grooms are, but with that eager, shaky kind of hope. A good man. Honest. Raised by farmers and prayers. Emily stood beside him. Auburn hair pinned beneath a lace veil, dress fitting her like memory. She held a bouquet of wildflowers tight in her hands, like it might float away if she loosened her grip. She smiled, or tried to. But the curve of her lips came too late, and her eyes. Her eyes were screaming. The Reverend took a breath. One he'd taken hundreds of times before. Dearly beloved. But the words didn't come easy. Not this time. Not with her looking like she wanted to run. And then, she did. But not yet. It began with the door. A sound, subtle, almost polite. The side entrance creaked open. No one turned. No one but the bride. A man entered. Tall, in a dark coat that didn't belong to summer. He stood in the shadows, face hidden, unmoving. Watching. Emily's body went still. And then, in a moment Reverend Haley would remember to his dying day, she dropped her bouquet. The petals hit the floor soft as ash. Then silence. Then chaos. Emily turned, veil trailing behind her like smoke, and ran. Down the aisle. Out the church. Into the wind. Gone. The congregation gasped. Someone shouted her name. But by the time Daniel stepped forward, confused and heartbroken, the door was already swinging shut behind her. Later that night, when the sun had long since set behind the pines and the pews stood empty in the hush of candle smoke, Reverend Haley sat alone in his office. The stained glass threw colors onto the floor like scattered marbles. His Bible lay open, unread. His tea had gone cold. And then, at 11:46 p.m., the phone rang. He stared at it a long while before lifting the receiver. Reverend Haley speaking. Silence. Then a voice, low, dry, and frayed like a rope pulled too tight for too long. She was never supposed to come back. Who is this? You need to listen. Emily Walker doesn't exist. She died 13 years ago. If you care about that boy she was supposed to marry, tell him to stop looking. Click. Just like that, the line went dead. By sunrise, Mayberry Falls was abuzz like a kicked hornet's nest. Folks whispered over fences, between spoonfuls of grits and sips of morning coffee. Theories bloomed like dandelions. Some said she'd run off with another man. Others claimed she learned something dark about Daniel. But Reverend Haley, he knew better. He'd seen people run before. Men dodging debts. Girls escaping bad hands. But no one ran like that, not without something chasing them. And no woman cries like that unless her whole soul is splintering. 3 days later, a brown paper package arrived at the church. No return address. No note. Inside was a photograph. Black and white. Faded. A little girl, no older than 10, standing barefoot in front of a crooked farmhouse. Her eyes were unmistakable. Emily's eyes. On the back, written in block letters. Run. Reverend Haley felt something inside him still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. He knew that house. He'd seen it once, long ago. A fire had taken it. They called it a gas leak. A tragedy. A family lost. But not all of them. One body was never found. That night, Reverend Haley pulled down his old leather-bound Bible. The one with creased pages and the bookmark frayed by decades of funerals and baptisms. He didn't pray for answers. Not anymore. He prayed for protection. Because whatever secret that girl was running from, it was coming back. And this time, it wasn't just coming for her. It was coming for all of them. Grief wears many masks. Some people cry. Some people curse God. Daniel Brooks got quiet. 3 days had passed since the wedding that never was. The white ribbon still hung limp on the church fence. The petals had dried into silence on the chapel floor. And Daniel, he hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since. He sat on the porch of his late father's farmhouse. Not moving. Just watching the gravel road. Like he was waiting for something. For her. For Emily. Or, whoever she really was. The sun had started to set, that heavy southern gold that touches every memory you've tried to forget. A breeze stirred the wind chimes, making them hum an old tune that neither he nor the porch remembered the name of. In his lap sat the photograph Reverend Haley had given him. The little girl in front of the farmhouse. The same eyes. The word on the back, run. Daniel stared at it like it held a secret he wasn't ready to understand. And then, the sound of tires on gravel. A dusty blue pickup slowed to a stop near the mailbox. The kind of truck that had seen years and roads and grief of its own. The man who stepped out moved like an old tree, slow, stiff, with weight in every joint. Aviator sunglasses hid his eyes. One hand held a newspaper. The other, a sealed envelope. Daniel stood, cautious. "Can I help you?" The man didn't answer right away. Just studied him. Like someone remembering a wound that never fully closed. Then he tossed the envelope onto the steps. "She ain't who you think she is," he said. His voice was gravel and old smoke. "Not even close." Daniel blinked. "Who is she?" The man turned without another word, climbed into the truck, and drove off. The engine disappeared into the hush of evening. Daniel picked up the envelope. No name. No stamp. Just a single sentence, scribbled in shaky ink. "I thought I buried her." Inside, another photograph. Color this time. A wedding, probably taken in the mid-90s. The bride, auburn hair, soft smile, same stormy eyes. Eyes that watched the world too closely. It was Emily. Or someone who looked too much like her to be coincidence. Daniel turned the photo over. Meredith and Holloway. August 18, 1997. And beneath that, written in old-fashioned script. She wore the same dress. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. Instead, he drove. 3 hours. Past midnight. Crossing state lines. The address from the newspaper the old man held led him to a roadside diner just past a place called Wren's Hollow. A place where shutters stayed closed even in the daylight. A town where front porches whispered more secrets than the people living on them. Daniel pulled up slow. The lights of the diner flickered like old memories. Inside, in the back booth, the man from the truck was waiting. Coffee in hand. Newspaper folded beside him. Daniel slid into the booth across from him. You knew her. The man didn't move. Just gave a slow nod. I married her, he said. Like it still hurt to say out loud. Daniel's throat tightened. She said her name was Emily. You knew her as Meredith. She told me she was a schoolteacher, the man went on. Quiet. Kind. Always humming songs she didn't know the words to. Carried herself like someone always listening for footsteps. He looked out the window. For a while, it felt like peace. We bought a little house. Painted the kitchen yellow. Planted roses. He paused, then added, voice low. One night she didn't come home. Daniel waited. The silence said more than words. I found the front door cracked open, the man said. Blood on the knob. A smell like smoke. He swallowed. But nothing was burning. Daniel leaned in. And you never saw her again? Not her, the man said. But I saw those eyes. On a missing person flyer. Different name. Different hair. Same girl. Later that night, Daniel found the house. The one the man had described. It was sagging with time. Shutters gone. Roof bowed. But inside, everything was still. Like time had stood up and left without saying goodbye. The kitchen walls were still yellow. Dust lay thick like snowfall. In the bedroom closet, something strange. Dozens of newspaper clippings. Taped up, overlapping. Fires. Accidents. Girls gone missing. Different cities. Different years. But always. Her. Same eyes. Same face. Different names. And in the center, freshly taped, a clipping from Mayberry Falls. From just 2 weeks ago. Daniel's breath caught. His hands trembled. Was she a con artist? A ghost? Or just a woman hunted so long she forgot who she really was? Then, beneath a loose floorboard by the bedroom window, a music box. Silver. Worn. He opened it. A soft tune played. Faint. Faded. The kind of melody you know in your bones before your ears catch up. Inside the lid, a folded note. If you found this, it means I'm gone. Not dead. Just gone. I didn't lie to you, Daniel. I loved you. And maybe that's the biggest lie I ever told myself, that I deserved it. Find Reverend Haley. He knows the rest. Daniel sat back on the floor. The song played on. And outside, the wind howled like it remembered her name. Names are funny things. They feel solid, like anchors. But sometimes, they're just smoke. Daniel Brooks sat behind the wheel of his father's old truck, the name Elizabeth Rowan echoing in his mind like a hymn sung in an empty church. The envelope Reverend Haley had given him, the one Emily left behind, sat on the seat beside him, its edges soft from handling. Inside were 2 short lines. That's all. Elizabeth Rowan. I didn't light the fire. Outside, the rain tapped steady against the windshield, blurring the world into shapes he didn't want to name. And so he drove. Past the fields. Past the towns. Past the memory of a woman who might have never been real, and yet felt more real than anything he'd ever known. By sunrise, he was in Willow Creek. A courthouse that looked forgotten by time stood in the center of town, its paint peeling, flag half raised, and a sleepy clerk at the front desk who looked like he remembered Watergate better than last week's lunch. 3 hours and a carefully folded $100 bill later, Daniel held the file in his hands. Thin. Fragile. As if time had tried to erase it. Elizabeth Rowan. Born, July 2, 1991. Reported missing, August 14, 2003. Age, 12. Status, presumed deceased, house fire. Only a few pages. The rest had been lost to smoke and silence. The fire had consumed the house. Her parents' remains were found in the kitchen. But hers were never recovered. In the margins of the final report, someone, likely a tired detective long retired, had scribbled. No remains. No footprints. Just ashes. Daniel closed the file slowly. She didn't die. She ran. He drove out to the old property. The road twisted through trees that seemed to lean a little too close. The further he went, the more the air thickened, like it was holding its breath. The house, or what was left of it, sat buried in weeds and memory. Charred wood jutted out like broken ribs. Daniel stepped through what used to be the front room. His boots crunched over blackened tile. His breath caught. The silence here wasn't just quiet. It was held. As if the walls remembered everything. In the corner, half covered by soot, he saw something small. He knelt. A child's shoe. Melted at the edge. Still clasped. As if someone small had refused to let go. 12 years old. And still fighting. Back in Mayberry Falls, Reverend Haley met Daniel on the church steps. The older man looked tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from sleepless nights, but from carrying secrets too long. I baptized her, he said quietly. Elizabeth Rowan. I remember it now. Summer of '98. Her mother brought her in. Nervous woman, always looking behind her. Her father, well, he had the look of a man who didn't believe in grace. Daniel nodded. You remember anything else? There was a storm, the night of the fire. Lightning took out half the county's power. Sirens came late. The Reverend paused, his voice soft as old cloth. But what I remember most was the morning after. He turned his gaze toward the altar. There, on the church steps, was a rosary. Small. Worn. Hers. I'd given it to her at the baptism. Daniel's breath caught. She came here. I think so, Reverend Haley whispered. I think she came to me. Scared. Alone. And then, she disappeared again. Back at the farmhouse, Daniel opened the music box once more. The tune played like it always had. But this time, he noticed something new. In the velvet lining, tucked tight in the seam, a folded scrap of paper. He unfolded it carefully. If you're reading this, you found one of the names. But there were more girls before me. Daniel's blood turned to ice. She hadn't just been running. She'd been hiding from something older. Bigger. Something that burned out lives like it was scripture. The next morning, Daniel tracked down a name he'd seen in the fire report, Rita Glenn, a retired journalist who used to write for the Willow County Ledger. They met at a roadside diner off Route 9. The coffee tasted like regret and the booths creaked like bones. Rita was in her 70s. Hair pinned back. Eyes sharp as pins. Daniel showed her the note. The name. The photograph. She didn't flinch. I remember the Rowan case, she said, sipping her coffee. Tried to write about it. Got pulled off quick. Folks upstairs didn't like questions being asked. She slid a folder across the table. Thin. Smelled of ink and time. Inside, notes, clippings, and one photograph that stopped Daniel cold. A teenage boy. Maybe 16. Dark eyes. Familiar cheekbones. Rita tapped the image. Her brother, she said. Went missing 2 months before the fire. Police said he ran away. But I think he knew something. Maybe even tried to stop it. Daniel leaned in. Stop what? She looked over her glasses. There were rumors. About the parents. About a community they were part of. Private. Closed off. Always talking about purification. Fire. Cleansing. She paused. Her voice dropped. And every few years, a girl disappeared. Daniel drove home in silence. The photograph sat beside him on the seat. The rosary in his pocket. The music box in the back. Elizabeth, or Emily, or Meredith, or whoever she was, hadn't just survived. She'd escaped. And whatever she escaped from, was still out there. Waiting. Watching. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one left. Some memories fade like fog. Others wait, like ghosts behind locked doors. Daniel sat on the porch, the music box beside him, the burnt wedding veil in his hands. The scent of old smoke clung to it still, not strong, but enough to stir something ancient in the air. He unfolded the note. The handwriting was shaky, like a child's. She used to cry in the room with the yellow curtains. Ask the woman on Winter Lane. He knew the street. Every curve. Every oak tree. It curved just outside Mayberry Falls, where the pavement thinned and time slowed to a hush. At the end of the road sat Wrenwood Rest Home. The kind of place where memories drift down halls like perfume, and silence means more than words. Miss Agnes Whitley, the nurse asked, flipping through a visitor's log. She doesn't get many folks, she added softly. And she don't like talking about the past. Not anymore. Daniel nodded. I won't stay long. Room 312 sat at the end of the east wing, where the sun spilled through sheer curtains and the floorboards creaked like old songs. Inside, an old woman sat by the window. Her skin was pale and soft as candle wax. A knitted shawl hung around her shoulders. Her eyes, sharp, faded blue, turned toward him like she'd been waiting. I knew you'd come, she whispered. Daniel took the chair beside her. You knew her? He asked. Miss Agnes didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached down beside her chair and pulled out a wooden box. Carved initials. Worn corners. Inside, a photograph. A young girl, no more than 12, wrapped in a hospital blanket. Behind her, yellow curtains and sunlight bleeding through. I called her Jane, Agnes said softly. She never told me her name. She came in the summer of 2003. Said her house burned down. Said her family was gone. Daniel stared at the photo. That's her. Elizabeth. She was sweet, Agnes said. Scared of every sound, but gentle. Hummed little songs. Helped the nurses fold towels. She didn't speak much, but her eyes, Lord, those eyes. Agnes wiped the edge of her glasses. Then one day, men came, she whispered. Said they were from the state. No names. No badges. They didn't speak to me, just took her. Like furniture. And you never saw her again? Daniel asked. Agnes looked down. But she left me something. She passed Daniel the box. Inside, scraps of newspaper. A ribbon. A cassette tape. She said if someone ever came looking, someone who truly cared, to give them this. That night, at the farmhouse, Daniel dusted off his father's old cassette player. The kind that clicked when you pressed play and hummed before the tape even began. He slid the cassette in. Static. Then breath. Then her voice. Soft. Careful. And unmistakably hers. If you're listening to this, I probably don't have much time left. My name was Elizabeth Rowan. Or Meredith. Or Emily. I've had so many names, I stopped counting. I never meant to lie. I just wanted to live. To love. To not be afraid. There was a group. My parents were part of it. They believed fire was holy. That it cleansed sin. They used it to erase people. To erase girls like me. Her voice cracked. I was supposed to die that night. But my brother, he hid me. He stayed behind. He didn't make it. A long pause. The tape hissed softly. I don't know why they're still looking. Maybe I saw something. Maybe I remember more than I think. But every time I try to start again, someone else pays the price. Another breath. If you're hearing this, please, don't follow me. Don't chase shadows. Just know. I loved you. Daniel. I loved you. He sat there long after the tape ended. The house was quiet. But not the kind of quiet that comforts. This was the kind of quiet that listens. Daniel opened the wooden box again. Inside, tucked behind the cassette, was a photo. A blurry street scene. Elizabeth walking past a corner store. Behind her, just visible on a road sign. Hollow Creek, Route 17. Daniel blinked. He knew that place. And more than that. He knew what stood at the end of that road. An old church. Forgotten. Abandoned. But not empty. By dawn, he was already driving. The road stretched long and lean, cutting through mist and memory. Trees lined the shoulders like sentinels. No birds sang. The wind didn't move. The church looked exactly how he remembered it from years ago. Sagging roof. Ivy curling up the stone. Windows shattered. Time had left it behind. But in the back. A light. A single flickering candle. Daniel stepped inside. The wooden floor groaned under his weight. Dust hung in the air like breath that had nowhere to go. There, on the front pew, sat a letter. His name written on it. Daniel. He opened it slowly. If you found this, then you still believe in me. That's more than I ever believed I deserved. I didn't leave to hurt you. I left to protect you. You remember the lake, that day I said I had dreams I couldn't explain? They weren't dreams. They were memories. There was a room in our house. Locked. Always locked. My parents called it the quiet room. One night, when I was 6, I heard crying. Another girl. My age. I opened the door. Her name was Sarah. She'd gone missing months before. Posters everywhere. But she was there. In that room. My parents told me it was a dream. A lie. A game. But I never saw her again. That was the day I stopped believing they were just strange. That was the day I knew they were dangerous. Daniel folded the letter slowly. He looked up at the flickering candle. And behind the altar, a sound. A footstep. A breath. And then. She appeared. Soaked from the rain. Thin. Tired. But real. Elizabeth. Emily. Meredith. All and none. She met his eyes. Don't say it, she whispered. I don't deserve it. But Daniel stepped forward. You survived, he said gently. You carried a weight no one should bear. And still, somehow, you loved. She looked down. I brought you here so you'd run. He pulled something from his coat pocket. The ledger. The folder. The names. This ends now. She shook her head. They're watching. They always have been. Daniel's voice was calm. Steady. Then let them watch. They didn't run. Not this time. Daniel and Elizabeth walked into the storm. Not hand in hand, but side by side, like two people who had finally stopped hiding from the past and started facing it. They drove to the only person who could help. Not the sheriff. Not the town council. But someone who had seen darkness dressed as faith before. Agent Marla Dean. Her office sat in a nondescript state building 2 towns over. Concrete walls. Fluorescent lights. Coffee that tasted like battery acid. But her eyes, they were alive. Sharp. Calm. The eyes of someone who'd lost things. And decided never to lose again. You're not crazy, she said, flipping through the folder they'd brought. Because I've seen this before. Not once. Not twice. But enough to know how deep it goes. She turned to the map behind her desk. Dozens of red pins dotted the counties. Fires. Disappearances. Girls, presumed dead. They hide behind scripture, she said. Behind old money and closed doors. Cults with bank accounts. She pointed at the ledger Daniel had recovered. This is gold. Then she looked up at Elizabeth. You're the first to survive long enough to speak. Elizabeth didn't flinch. I don't want to speak, she said softly. I want to stop them. Marla nodded once. Then we lay a trap. It started with a whisper. A false lead planted where the right ears would catch it. A story about a runaway bride. A ledger. A threat to go public. And then, they waited. 2 days. 3. And on the 4th, something changed. The church in Mayberry Falls was quiet that evening. Too quiet. Reverend Haley stood alone at the pulpit, the wind outside brushing against the stained glass like fingers trying to find a way in. The lights flickered once. And then the door opened. He stepped inside, calm, composed, dressed like a banker. Not a hair out of place. Not a crease on his coat. A smile hung on his lips like something borrowed from another face. Reverend, he said, voice smooth as silk on a coffin. I hoped it wouldn't come to this. Haley didn't move. You were one of them. The man tilted his head. Still am. From the shadows behind the altar, Elizabeth stepped out. Eyes steady. Spine straight. I remember you, she said. The quiet room. You were always there. You never touched me. But you watched. The man smiled wider. You weren't meant to survive. She stepped closer. But I did. He took a step forward. You've said enough. But what he didn't know, was that the church was wired. Every word. Every threat. Agent Dean was already outside. Her team in place. Ears on every syllable. And just as the man reached inside his coat, the doors burst open. Floodlights. Boots. Guns. Voices shouting commands with the kind of certainty that makes evil pause. The man raised his hands, but the mask, the one he'd worn for decades, had already fallen. You think this ends with me, he hissed. You've cut off a hand. But the body lives. Elizabeth stepped forward. I'm not afraid of shadows anymore. She pulled the rosary from her pocket, the same one Reverend Haley gave her as a girl. As Elizabeth. And her voice didn't shake. I found my voice. You can't take it again. That night, the first arrests were made. And with the ledger, names, dates, payments, locations, the floodgates opened. Raids. Warrants. Testimonies. And in the weeks that followed, silence gave way to sound. A dozen girls were found, alive. Some had forgotten their names. Others refused to speak. But they were free. And that was the beginning. 1 year later. Mayberry Falls was different. Still quiet. Still slow. But no longer afraid. The church was filled again, not with whispers, but with warmth. And this time, there was no veil. No secrets. Elizabeth Rowan stood at the altar in a soft blue dress, not the white of pretending, but the color of peace. Daniel stood beside her. Steady. Strong. Reverend Haley's voice trembled, not from fear, but from joy. Do you, Daniel Brooks, take this woman, in all her names, in all her truths, and in all her scars, to be your wife? Daniel's voice was clear. I do. Then the Reverend turned to her. And do you, Elizabeth Rowan, finally, take this man, not in fear, but in love, and vow to never run again? Tears welled in her eyes. I do. They kissed. And this time, no one ran. There was laughter. There were tears. Even the old woman in the back row, the one with the wide-brimmed hat and hands like river stones, smiled. She held a photograph in her lap. A girl with fire in her eyes. Because she knew. This story wasn't about destruction. It was about survival. That night, at a quiet motel on the edge of town, Elizabeth sat on the bed holding a photograph of her brother, the boy who saved her once. I wish he could see this, she whispered. Daniel took her hand. He can. She smiled. For real, this time. Not the smile of someone hiding. But the smile of someone seen. Just before dawn. A knock at the door. Soft. Measured. Daniel opened it. No one there. Only an envelope. Inside, a newspaper clipping. Another fire. Another house. Another girl, presumed dead. And a note, handwritten in crooked lines. You've only scratched the surface. They sat across from Agent Marla Dean the next morning. The map on her wall had changed. More pins. More towns. More silence. Red for confirmed cases. Blue for survivors. Yellow, for those still missing. Marla tapped the newest article. The fire from the envelope. Someone sending a message, she said. They know we're watching now. Daniel leaned forward. Then let's make them see what happens when we don't look away. He turned to Elizabeth. Her back was straight. Eyes clear. Voice steady. Then we don't stop. We finish what we started. Some people call it justice. Others call it vengeance. But for them, it was something simpler. A promise. Not whispered at the altar. But carved into the soul. The months that followed blurred into motion. They testified. They traveled. They listened. To stories buried for decades. To names forgotten by everyone but the ones who wore them. Elizabeth spoke at shelters. At schools. To lawmakers. She told them about the quiet room. About the ledger. About the girls who never made it out. She didn't use her false names anymore. Only one. Elizabeth Rowan. And people listened. Because when someone speaks who once had no voice, the world leans in. Daniel became the keeper of names. He kept files. Photos. Pins on maps. He wrote letters to families whose daughters had vanished before the internet could carry their stories. And sometimes, just sometimes, he received one back. That's her. She had the same eyes. We thought we'd imagined her. One spring morning, they returned to the old farmhouse. The one Elizabeth had once called home, in that other life. There was still soot between the floorboards. Still the faint scent of char. But in the backyard, they planted something. A tree. Stubborn. Young. But full of promise. Beneath it, they buried the rosary. The music box. The letter that started it all. Not to forget. But to remember right. In time, people started calling them survivors. But that word never quite fit. Because surviving means you escaped. And Elizabeth hadn't just escaped. She'd fought. And kept fighting. Not because she wanted to. But because someone had to. One day, a package arrived. No return address. Just a small wooden cross. And a note. They're watching the wrong girl now. Inside, a photograph. A teenager. Auburn hair. Same tired eyes. Alive. Elizabeth stared at it for a long time. Then looked up. Daniel, she said, voice steady. She's out there. Alone. Like I was. He nodded. I'll get the truck. And so it began again. But not as a chase. As a search. For names. For faces. For girls the world tried to erase. They weren't running anymore. They were looking. They were remembering. And they were not alone. Years passed. The world kept turning. But in small towns, in forgotten corners, whispers spread. Whispers of a woman who showed up at burned houses and didn't flinch. Of a man who asked the right questions and never raised his voice. Of stories returned to families like long-lost photographs. And always, always, of a blue dress. The color of sky after rain. One evening, Reverend Haley stood once again at the church door. He was older now. Slower. But his hands still knew how to hold peace. As the sun dipped behind the trees, he saw them walking up the path. Daniel. Elizabeth. And behind them, a girl. Maybe 16. Thin. Silent. But with eyes wide open. She's safe, Daniel said quietly. Haley nodded. She'll need time. We've got plenty, Elizabeth said, smiling. And they stepped into the light. Some truths are too heavy to carry. So we share them. Some fires never go out. But we can choose how they burn. Elizabeth Rowan never disappeared again. She became a name others whispered with hope. Not a ghost. But a guide. And somewhere, in a room where sunlight dances through yellow curtains. A girl closes her eyes, knowing someone is coming. Not to take her. But to save her. Because some stories don't end. They pass hands. Like torches. And they burn. Not to destroy. But to light the way home. If this story moved you, if you saw a shadow of yourself or someone you love, leave a note below. Tell us where you're reading from. Let's see how far the light reaches.